It's time to switch gears from the Prince of Darkness to the modern Prometheus. The original James Whale Frankenstein film bears several things in common with Todd Browning's Dracula. For one thing, it came out about 9 months after. In addition, it is also based on a play instead of directly on the original book. As such, the narrative barely bears any resemblance to that of Mary Shelley's original novel. In conjunction with this, it even has a few of the same cast members. For example, Dwight Fry, who played Dracula's servant, portrays Frankenstein's assistant here. Also, Edward Van Sloan, having previously played Van Helsing, acts as Frankenstein's medical professor in this film. The story itself begins with Henry Frankenstein collecting body parts with the intention of piecing them together and creating an entirely new being. Once he finally brings his creature to life, he deems it mentally unfit to interact with anyone and locks it up. While Frankenstein attempts to repair relationships with his family, his monster gets free and goes on a rampage, prompting its creator to come to terms with his mistakes. One aspect that is immediately noticeable is the plethora of cliches that have since been imitated and parodied countless times. For instance, this movie contains one of the earliest and most popular instances of the mad scientist archetype. However, these cliches were just starting out when this film came along, so it is interesting to see where a lot of them originated, with one of the more notable examples coming in the form of Frankenstein himself. Colin Clive plays the titular character with a constant menace in his eye. His glares and limitless ambition are played to the extreme, to the point where you never get bored of watching him. There's always a degree of sinister resoluteness in his deliveries that makes his goal more believable when spoken by a character as off-the-wall as this. Dwight Fry is similarly entertaining as his assistant Fritz, bringing some of the same wild-eyed expressions that he employed for Renfield while adding a submissiveness that suits the character here. John Bowles and Mae Clark as Victor Moritz and Frankenstein's fiancée Elizabeth are each fairly memorable in their roles as the voices of reason, with Clark really selling her devotion to Henry despite being somewhat one-note. Edward Van Sloan is more distinctive as Dr. Waldman, possessing his own brand of stern authority while mixing it with an intelligent sharpness. Of course, mention must be made of Boris Karloff as the monster, giving one of the most striking performances. Despite the lack of dialogue, Karloff makes extensive use of body language and his eyes. His movements are very infantile in nature, with the inarticulate noises really making the audience care for this misunderstood simpleton. Another positive has to be the costume and set design, which are larger in scope than those of Dracula. The laboratory, like so many other aspects of this film, has become iconic in how it mixes Gothic architecture with scientific devices. One issue, however, that hurts the movie is the lack of build-up. The story doesn't spend as much time introducing Frankenstein as I would have liked. Perhaps there was an ulterior motive to make this more of a creature feature. We are given very little time to digest what it would mean to create life from lifelessness. The film begins with Frankenstein already nearing the end of his experiments, with only a passing mention of the preliminary tests that he had done up to that point. Wouldn't it have been interesting to see the progression instead of jumping right into creating the monster? Speaking of which, not as much discussion is done as I think was called for in regards to the moral and ethical ramifications of creating a new being. Sure, we see Dr. Waldman and others refer to it as a monster, but we don't really go too far beyond that. However, this does little to diminish the impact of Frankenstein, as it sports strong performances, elaborate set design, and a memorable story of a man creating a monster.